A former employee at Danny Koker's own auto shop secretly stole more than $75,000 using forged signature stamps of Danny's own name. And by the time anyone noticed, the damage had already been done, both to the books and to Danny's trust in the people around him. For nearly a decade, Danny, the Count Koker, was a fixture of Tuesday nights on the History Channel, the loud, bandana-wearing rock and roll mechanic who built a television empire out of a Las Vegas garage. Then, seemingly overnight, Counting Cars simply stopped airing new episodes, and the show that had made him a household name quietly disappeared from the schedule without so much as a farewell episode. No network statement, no goodbye special, just silence, followed by years of rumors, wild speculation, and tabloid stories that range from misleading to flatly false. So what actually happened to Danny Koker, and where is he now? The real story turns out to be less of a dramatic collapse, and far more a story about how a man who built his entire identity out of stubborn self-reliance handled genuine hardship, largely out of view of the cameras, that once followed his every move. To understand how Danny Koker ended up at the center of a hit reality show in the first place, it helps to understand just how unusual his path to fame actually was. He was born in 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio, into a family where music and machines were equally present from the very beginning. His father, Daniel Koker Sr., was a genuinely accomplished musician, a classically trained pianist and baritone who spent years touring with gospel and southern gospel groups, including the Cathedral Quartet, the Weatherford Quartet, and the Rex Humbard Family Singers, at times playing piano behind performers like Johnny Cash and Mahalia Jackson. That musical pedigree shaped Danny early. He grew up singing alongside his family in churches and revival settings, developing a genuine talent as a vocalist and performer well before anyone was talking about custom cars. At the same time, his family had deep ties to the automotive world, with relatives who worked for the Ford Motor Company, and Danny spent part of his childhood in Detroit, the literal heart of America's car culture, where his fascination with vehicles took root alongside his musical training. By his own account, his father gave him his first taste of that world with a small cruiser bicycle when he was around 8 years old, a modest gift that nonetheless sparked a lifelong fascination that would eventually define his career far more than music ever did, even though the two never fully separated. Rather than choosing between those two very different worlds, Danny simply pursued both simultaneously, a pattern that would come to define nearly everything he did afterward. His family eventually relocated to Las Vegas, where they came to own a local television station, and it was there that Danny got his first real taste of the entertainment spotlight. Not through cars at all, but through a campy horror movie hosting character he created called Count Cool Rider. Starting around 1990, he appeared in that persona on a local program called Saturday Fright at the Movies, cracking jokes between broadcasts of B-grade horror films and building a small but devoted local following among Las Vegas viewers who tuned in for the campy charm, as much as the movies themselves. That early experience in front of camera, low budget as it was, gave Danny a genuine feel for performance and audience connection that would later translate directly into his television career. And it's worth noting that the character's name, with its winking vampire theme, would eventually echo forward into branding of nearly every business he went on to build, from Count's Kustoms to Count's Vamp to Count's Tattoo Company. Even as he built a name for himself locally through Count Cool Rider, Danny never stopped working with his hands. He taught himself the fundamentals of auto restoration largely through hands-on trial and error, without any form of mechanical training. And by the 1990s, he had opened Count's Kustoms, a Las Vegas shop specializing in restoring and customizing classic cars and motorcycles. Around the same period, he also opened Count's Vamp Rock Bar and Grill, a vampire and rock-themed venue that quickly became something of a sanctuary for Las Vegas's biker and classic rock communities, featuring moody lighting, leather booths, and live music most nights of the week. For years, this was simply Danny's life, running a working auto shop by day, playing music and hosting events at his bar most nights, entirely under the radar of national television. He was, by his own later description, a well-known figure within Las Vegas itself, but essentially unknown to anyone outside city limits, a jack of several trades who had mastered each one without ever quite breaking out of the desert that had shaped him. That changed because of a connection to a completely different reality show. Producers working on History Channel's Pawn Stars needed a classic car expert who could speak naturally and knowledgeably on camera, someone who could praise a vehicle's value and condition, without sounding like he was reading off a textbook. Danny was brought in as a recurring guest expert, appraising classic cars that came through Rick Harrison's pawn shop, and audiences responded immediately to his genuine enthusiasm and easy, unscripted expertise. Ratings noticeably improved whenever Danny appeared on screen, and History Channel executives eventually made the trip to Las Vegas to see Count's Kustoms for themselves. What they found wasn't just a garage, but an entire self-contained world Danny had built over decades, a working restoration shop, a passionate and colorful crew of mechanics and fabricators, and a rock bar next door where Danny played piano late into the night. The pitch that followed was simple. They would give him a handful of episodes built entirely around his existing shop and crew, with Danny's only real condition being that the show stayed true to what actually happened at Count's Kustoms rather than manufacturing artificial drama. Counting Cars premiered on the History Channel on August 13, 2012, and it found its audience quickly, structured around real restoration projects at Count's Kustoms. The show combined genuine automotive craftsmanship with the kind of loud, colorful personalities that made for compelling television without needing much embellishment. Viewers came to know Danny's crew almost as well as they knew Danny himself, painter Ryan Evans, longtime right-hand man Kevin Mack, Hungarian-born fabricator Rolly Sabo, and Gentle Giant mediator Shannon Ikaw, among others, each bringing a distinct personality to the daily chaos of the shop floor. The dynamic worked precisely because it wasn't manufactured for television. These were people who had already been working alongside Danny for years before any camera showed up, which gave their disagreements, their inside jokes, and their genuine camaraderie a texture that scripted reality competition shows simply couldn't replicate. The show ultimately ran for 10 seasons and roughly 184 episodes, becoming one of the History Channel's longest-running and most reliable performers, and cementing Danny's status as a nationally recognized figure well beyond the boundaries of Las Vegas. But while the show projected an image of loud, colorful stability, something considerably more serious was unfolding behind the scenes, and it had nothing to do with ratings or on-screen drama. In 2016, a Count's Kustoms bookkeeper named Joseph Frontiera, who had been brought on through a staffing agency to help manage the company's finances, began quietly misusing his access to company funds. According to a lawsuit Count's Kustoms later filed in federal court in Nevada, Frontiera used business accounts to make a down payment on his personal Range Rover and to cover the cost of personal airline tickets, all while the company's own taxes went unpaid, eventually triggering an IRS penalty of roughly $18,000. Perhaps most brazenly, court filings allege that Frontiera had signature stamps made bearing the names of Danny Koker and his business partner Kevin Mack, using them to authorize checks without either man's knowledge or consent while they were away from the office. In total, the lawsuit accused him of misappropriating more than $75,000 from the business, funds that were meant to cover parts, payroll, and the everyday costs of keeping a working restoration shop running. The case, filed as Count's Kustoms LLC versus Frontiera in the United States District Court for the District of Nevada, worked its way through the legal system over the following years. Court records show the matter was ultimately resolved, with the case formally closed in 2019 and Frontiera ordered to pay Count's Kustoms more than $40,000 in damages, though public reporting at the time noted uncertainty around exactly how much of that amount was ever actually recovered. The lawsuit also named the staffing agency that placed Frontiera at the company, alleging it failed to disclose his prior history involving embezzlement allegations from an earlier position, a detail that, if true, meant Danny's business had been exposed to a known risk without his knowledge. Regardless of the exact financial recovery, the episode left a mark on Danny that went beyond the dollar figure. For a man who had spent decades building trust with the people around him, both his shop crew and his television audience, discovering that a trusted employee had exploited that same trust for personal gain represented a genuinely different kind of blow than anything the show's manufactured drama had ever depicted. It's the kind of betrayal that rarely makes for compelling reality television, precisely because it unfolds slowly in spreadsheets and bank statements rather than dramatic confrontations, which is likely part why so few casual fans of the show ever heard much about it at all. Notably, the Frontiera case wasn't the only legal dispute Count's Kustoms weathered over the years. The business also became entangled in a separate civil dispute involving a customer over a restoration budget, sometimes referred to informally by fans as the Hurt Mustang case, underscoring that running a business built around expensive, high-stakes automotive restoration work inevitably invites occasional legal friction, whether from customers, employees, or outside vendors. None of these disputes ever resulted in criminal charges against Danny personally, a distinction that later fact-checking articles took pains to clarify once online rumors began conflating civil business litigation with the kind of criminal wrongdoing that simply never occurred. By the time Counting Cars entered its later seasons, the show was facing pressures that had nothing to do with any individual scandal at all. Ratings that had once regularly topped several million viewers per episode gradually declined over the years, a pattern common to almost any long-running reality series as audiences' attention shifts and a format's novelty wears thin after nearly a decade on air. Producing the show also wasn't cheap, with each episode requiring genuine restoration parts, labor, and the ongoing cost of documenting real automotive work, rather than staged competition segments. Then the COVID-19 pandemic arrived in 2020, disrupting production schedules across the entire television industry and making the kind of nationwide car-hunting road trips that had powered many of the show's storylines considerably harder to pull off. Against that backdrop, new episodes of Counting Cars simply stopped airing after the 2020 season. There was no official cancellation announcement from the History Channel, no farewell special, and no clear public explanation of what exactly had happened, a silence that left fans to fill in the blanks themselves. Rumors began circulating that Danny had been arrested for fraud, that federal investigators had raided his properties, or that he was secretly suffering from a serious illness he was hiding from the public. None of these claims were ever supported by any credible evidence, and multiple entertainment outlets that later looked into the rumors found no arrest records, no criminal charges, and no verified health crisis connecting to Danny at all. What had actually happened was considerably less dramatic than the rumor mill suggested, a natural, if quiet, conclusion to a decade-long television run, compounded by the same pandemic disruptions affecting productions everywhere. Rather than fighting to keep the show alive or mounting some kind of public campaign to clear his name, Danny largely chose to stay quiet and simply kept working, a decision that fit the same stubborn, self-reliant instincts that had defined his entire career up to that point. Count's Kustoms never closed its doors. The shop continued operating as both a working restoration business and a public attraction, complete with a free daily museum tour showcasing some of Danny's personal car and motorcycle collection, which by various accounts includes roughly 50 cars and 70 motorcycles accumulated over decades of collecting. Danny also continued expanding his business interests during these quieter years, including Count's Tattoo Company, a tattoo parlor he operates inside the Rio All-Suite Hotel and Casino, giving him yet another creative outlet layered on top of his automotive and musical pursuits. Members of the original television crew, including Kevin Mack, Ryan Evans, and Shannon Ikaw, remained active with the business as well, continuing to work alongside Danny long after the cameras that once documented their daily routine had packed up for good, a detail that speaks to a genuinely stable working relationship rather than the kind of behind-the-scenes fracturing that so often accompanies a long-running reality show's quiet end. Music remained just as central to Danny's life during this period as it always had been. His hard rock band, Count 77, formed years earlier out an impromptu open mic set at Vamp that unexpectedly caught on, continued performing regularly around Las Vegas and beyond, keeping Danny connected to the same stage performance instincts he developed as a child touring with his father's gospel groups. The band released its self-titled debut album in 2014 and a follow-up, Soul Transfusion, in 2017, and Danny continued performing live with the group well after Counting Cars left the air, treating music not as some nostalgic hobby, but as a genuinely active part of his ongoing career. Fans who followed Danny primarily through his automotive work were sometimes surprised to learn just how seriously he took his music, but for anyone who understood his upbringing, it made perfect sense. He had, after all, been a working musician years before he'd ever picked up a wrench, and the rock and roll persona he cultivated through Count 77, and Vamped wasn't some late career pivot, but a return to the very first passion his father had instilled in him. Eventually, though, even Count's Vamped, the rock bar that had anchored Danny's Las Vegas identity for 16 years, reached a turning point. In May 2025, Danny listed the venue for sale at an asking price of $4.3 million, and the club hosted its final show on June 10th of that year, before officially closing its doors. Speaking to the Las Vegas Review-Journal around the time of the sale, Danny was candid about the reasoning behind the decision, explaining that running a rock club took an enormous amount of time and sustained effort, especially after doing it continuously for 16 years, and that he felt it was time for someone else to take over and carry the venue forward into its next chapter. It wasn't presented as a financial collapse or a sign of failure, but as a genuinely practical business decision from a man managing an increasingly full plate of ventures across the city. Financially, despite years of tabloid speculation painting Danny as a man in decline, most credible estimates have consistently placed his net worth somewhere between $13 and $15 million in recent years, built across his automotive restoration business, his television earnings during Counting Cars peak seasons, his tattoo parlor, his music career, and years of savvy Las Vegas real estate and business decisions. That figure hardly suggests a man who had lost everything, and it lines up with the reality that Danny never actually stopped working across any of his major ventures, even during the years when Counting Cars itself sat dormant. It's a useful reminder of how misleading the gap between a celebrity's public television presence and their actual financial standing can be. A show going quiet doesn't necessarily mean the person behind it is struggling. Often, as in Danny's case, it simply means their income has shifted toward ventures that don't come with a weekly ratings report attached. By 2026, Danny had moved decisively past the uncertainty of the previous several years and back into active television and media production, this time on terms he controlled far more directly than during his original History Channel run. On March 31st, 2026, he launched Counts Culture, a new late-night style podcast and video series recorded inside a custom studio built at Counts Kustoms itself, complete with leather couches and a relaxed, vamp-style hangout atmosphere. Rather than following car restorations in the format Counting Cars had used, Counts Culture centers on long-form, largely unfiltered conversations with guests spanning music, motorsports, and entertainment, released weekly across Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Early episodes featured guests including longtime radio personality Eddie Trunk, UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture, and former Kiss guitarist Bruce Kulick, reflecting the same blend of car culture and classic rock sensibility that had always defined Danny's world, just presented now in a format built entirely around his own voice and interests rather than a network's restoration show formula. Notably, Sean Witt, who had served as an executive producer on Counting Cars, returned to work alongside Danny on the new project, suggesting a level of continuity and industry confidence in Danny's next chapter that undercuts any narrative of him being finished or forgotten. As the show's promotional description put it, Counts Culture blends car culture, rock and roll, and hard-earned lessons from icons across music, business, sports, and the automotive world, unfiltered conversations that let Danny pull genuine perspective out of guests who have built their own lives outside conventional lines, a description that could just as easily describe Danny's own winding career path. The show found its footing quickly. By its second season in the spring of 2026, Counts Culture had settled into a regular weekly release schedule, welcoming back familiar Counting Cars faces like Horny Mike and Ghetto Bob for looser, more freewheeling episodes alongside conversations with veteran musicians like bassist Phil Sosin, known for co-writing Ozzy Osbourne's Shot in the Dark. For longtime fans who had wondered for years whether they would ever see Danny back in front of camera on a regular basis, the new show offered a clear answer, delivered not through a dramatic comeback special, but through the same steady, unglamorous persistence that had defined nearly every chapter of his career up to that point. Danny has also remained visible through philanthropic work in recent years, including donating restored vehicles to charity auctions benefiting causes like Steven Tyler's Janie's Fund, which supports young survivors of child abuse. In one notable instance in early 2025, a 1978 Lincoln Continental he had personally restored sold at a Janie's Fund charity gala for $300,000, a detail that speaks to both his continued craftsmanship and his willingness to use his platform for causes beyond his own business interests. He followed that appearance with another donated restoration the following year, a 1962 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, continuing a pattern of quiet philanthropic involvement that rarely made headlines on its own, but that friends and colleagues in the Las Vegas entertainment community have pointed to as consistent with the version of Danny they know personally. Someone considerably more generous and community-minded than the tabloid caricature of a washed-up reality star ever gave him credit for. Looking at the full arc of what actually happened to Danny Koker, The real story turns out to be considerably less sensational, and in many ways more genuinely interesting than the rumors that filled the vacuum